Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's Ritchie from Boston. It is the 20th of March in the year 2020, or at least that's what they tell us. I am trying to make sure that it's the 20th of make sure I mute that. I did, and here we go. I am joined by Dr. Dr. Kauffman. You may have heard him on the Crow 777 live stream, and then Crow was smart enough to bring him back again, and then I was smart enough to reach out to him. Dr. Kauffman, how are you, brother? And I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much for your invitation. After getting familiar with your channel and your show, you've earned a lot of respect from me. And I have to say that I appreciate you talked about me yesterday, and you said something very important that really goes a long way. And this applies to your viewers as well, that don't trust what I say. Do your own research, confirm everything. When you said that you confirmed what I spoke about viruses on Crow, that just goes a long way. And, we all have a responsibility to be familiar and learn this information. And so it's really important that we check for ourselves so that we, only end up trusting the correct information.
I agree. And when I was listening to you talking, when I was listening to you on Crow's show, you mentioned Royal Rife. Now, I had done videos probably 6-7 years ago, and nobody really cared too much because it didn't apply to anything. But that's an amazing technology. And you mentioned that along with that really that super heavy duty deep microscope. The name escapes me right now. I just walked in the door like I told you. You want to talk about that stuff at all?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. And I think it has some quite a bit of relevance, actually. And Royal Rife, as I said before, is kind of known as the Tesla of medicine, a very brilliant guy. And he just was able to invent technology that was superior to anything else that was available and extremely useful. So he developed this microscope that had something like 30,000 times higher magnification than other microscopes that were available at the time. So it was really powerful and allowed him to see under the microscope these tiny little particles of cells they're known as protids or somatids. And these are actually the precursor or progenitor to many different microorganisms, including bacteria, fungi, and actually many pictures of what are allegedly called viruses are most likely actually these entities. And so what happens is these microzyma or protids, they're present in our cells. In fact, they're present in the cells of all living organisms, plants and animals. And when the conditions of an organism are such that there needs to be some cleanup and recycling efforts going on, and this is most common in a disease state, but also can happen as the body renews itself on a cyclical basis, that those precursors bud out of our cells, and then they go through a cycle where they become more and more differentiated and developed into the bacteria that's appropriate to go and clean up that mess. And this is, just like things happen in nature. We're all familiar with this when there's a dead animal or a dead plant on the ground, that all these microorganisms come and take care of it. They turn it into, it's a basic nutrients and elements, and then it becomes part of the soil, the earth, and allows more life to grow. Same thing that happens when our bodies die. And there's no need for any outside bacteria because the bacteria is already in the organism to undergo this process. So Royal Rife was able to visualize these elements, the protids, budding out of the cells at a very high resolution, such that he could observe their behavior. And this microscope, different from the microscopes used in medicine today, which only allow you to visualize generally dead fixed tissue. So they basically harvest the tissue and then apply chemicals to it that like formaldehyde, and then dies. And so you can't observe any of the behavior of the cells or organisms through the microscope, but this was very distinct with Royal Rife. And so he noticed that these little protids vibrate at a certain frequency, right? And I think I didn't mention on the other show, but this is really related to one of the 7 hermetic principles of vibration, that all beings vibrate. and that there's constant motion, and this is a really important principle of life. And he observed this. And what he was able to do is, using some electronics, that he could measure the frequency of the vibration. And he postulated that the frequency actually represents the disease state. And so once he was able to determine the frequency for a given patient, and I want to remind you that that wouldn't be possible without the powerful microscope. So once he was able to do that and determine the frequency, then he could use other devices that would generate electromagnetic radiation and would basically at the same frequency of the disease in that given patient. And after several brief sessions of applying this, he was able to result in the cure of a disease. And this was true not just for diseases that we would commonly know or think would be infectious, but also for other diseases like cancer, because these microorganisms, the cleanup crew, is essentially involved in cleaning up all these diseases. So the big tragedy here is that Reif's microscope was destroyed. Basically, people raided his laboratories at some point in his life when he was starting to get big and spread this information around. And he sort of got depressed and became an alcoholic, and the technology has never been recovered.
So this is like you say, he's the medicine's version of Tesla. Much like Tesla, who they poo-pooed all of his work. It was no big deal. We can't use that kind of free electricity, because how can we put a meter on it and charge the good people of the earth? Same thing with him, because it looks like they're using the information he figured out with the Rife machine to drop everybody's frequencies using fear, and it's working perfectly. And if I heard this correctly, cut me a little bit of slack, but if I heard this correctly when you were talking with Crow, it can make people sick when their body's frequency comes down. As new agey or crazy as that sounds, it's real, because they do it successfully all the time. Am I wrong?
Well, I think you're on the right track, and I can give some data to back that up, actually. But it just, in thinking about the whole Rife approach, it really just occurred to me that if a disease has a specific frequency, and if you can cure it using that frequency, then wouldn't it also be possible to induce the illness by perhaps using some sort of frequency radiation? And then I thought about, well, what about the data on cell phone radiation and Wi-Fi radiation and smart meters, right? And 5G. So we know that there's lots of illnesses associated, right? Like people that hold a cell phone up to their head many hours, right? They get tumors. They may not be cancerous tumors, but they're tumors called acoustic neuromas that occur inside the ear canal. And that's very well established. Of course, we know that some of the 5G technology was initially developed as a crowd control measure, so it clearly has a strong biological effect.
Oh, without a doubt. That I've seen that. I saw that in basic training back in the 90s, the first time we went to spread democracy in Iraq. The microwave weapons they're unbelievable, and they were back then. So now they're actually compact and going up as we speak.
Right. So, given these observations that are, widely accepted, I don't think it's really much of a stretch to say that this could be used in some way to purposely bring about a disease, or perhaps just accidentally, because as we develop more and more technology and infrastructure, we're not looking to study the health effects of it. Even the director of the FCC came out announcing the 5G rollout, and he said blatantly, no, we're not going to do any health studies.
It amazes me. They bring him in. Tom Wheeler was an enormous lobbyist for telecoms. They bring him in for a short span. He pushes all this through and says, we're not going to do all that. Like, he made it sound crazy. Other countries are testing this. We're going to be right out front with it because it's about billions of dollars, and then he signs everything. Everything's good to go. And he quietly goes through the revolving door to wherever he went.
Right. I'm sure back to a telecommunications.
I'm sure to reap the benefits. So, okay. I probably started this off wrong, but I did just walk in the door. Dr. Kauffman, what what are your credentials and what led you down this path? Because this is not the normal path for a doctor. They usually do exactly what the medication companies teach as medicine these days. You seem to have gone in a different direction, luckily for us.
Yes, well, there are a few doctors who have gone my direction, but it's certainly a very, very small minority. And so I am an MD, a medical doctor, and I mean, I can tell you about my schooling if you want to know, but I'm trained and board certified in forensic psychiatry, and I've held several leadership positions in a medical school. I've published research and book chapters and things like that, and now I just do consulting work. I do clinical work, but it's not your run of the mill type of clinical work. And what happened is that, and this really started quite early on in my training, in my residency training, that I just started to observe that people were not improving with psychiatric medications. And as I started looking closer at the literature, especially there was this great article that came out during my third or fourth year of residency that a statistician had gotten through the Freedom of Information Act a bunch of data that was submitted to the FDA to get a drug approval for an antidepressant, but it was never published, right? Because they only publish studies that show something that makes the drug look favorable. The other studies are, hidden, and they have to submit some to the FDA, of course, and that's how they were gotten. And so what they did is they combined the published studies that people were familiar with the unpublished data in what, a bigger statistical analysis called a meta-analysis. And they found that there was basically no difference between the treatment group and the placebo group. And this really struck me because it fit with my observations that people were not getting better from with antidepressants, except perhaps for a mild time-limited placebo effect. And almost all these studies are very short-term studies. I mean, like 12 weeks would be considered a long study, 20 weeks like really long. And that's not really long enough to know what happens to people. So this got me just starting looking at things and paying closer attention over time, and made me much more conservative with my prescribing and try to learn more about psychotherapy and other things I could do to help people. But as I continued to work at virtually every clinical position, the main thing that I was expected to do was prescribe. And you could almost call some modern doctors as just a prescriber, because there's not much else that you do. And I think this is especially true in psychiatry because there's no standardized diagnosis, like there's no blood test or X-ray. So you could basically say that anyone has any problem. And someone might have a different opinion, but it's almost justifiable because there's so little systematic approach to it. So as I continued more and more, I just saw that these things weren't working. And then I started looking outside of psychiatry and realized that the same thing's going on. And I think separately from medicine, I had sort of an awakening process that, that's a whole story unto itself. But, I started looking into the climate change narrative first, and then many other things. And it was, that kind of cascade effect that everything kept falling down. And the truth was the opposite of what I thought it was.
Isn't that crazy?
It's quite a ride. And
just before you continue, just for somebody like myself, it was mind-blowing. Almost got stuck in the house due to the depression, like everything's a lie. Someone with your credentials and the amount of studying that you've done, because I've looked at it, you're no joke. You're a serious dude. It must have blown your mind. It must have totally blown your mind. And then to see this unfolding where they're literally convincing people, don't go near your neighbor because you're going to get sick from him. And you're looking at that going, hey, that's not true at all. It's not true at all.
Yes. And I think a lot of people think that I'm a bit loony because I'm not scared and I'm not promoting all of this kind of fear propaganda. But, even my neighbors, their children who are friends with my children, it's like they won't let their children come in my house. My children are not allowed in their house. One neighbor, they're supposed to stay 6 feet away from the other kids when they're playing outside. It's people have really bought into this and are really afraid. And it's very scary. that people go to these extremes because, you know, I mean, look out there. Have you seen people dropping dead and people sick? I saw an interview of a woman who survived the Spanish flu of 1918. And she was a child at the time, but she, of course, remembers an event like that. You know, about 50 million people died worldwide. And her memories were that there was no room in the cemeteries, that people had to bury their kin in their backyard. You know,
crazy. That's crazy.
That is nowhere in the world is anyone experiencing that at present.
At all. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, like you said, you just found my channel not too long ago, but I've been on the road for 5 weeks, and I have been from Maine to Louisiana to Missouri to Massachusetts and back and back and back. And I have stopped and talked to every single truck driver, every single store owner, everybody. Nobody's sick. Everything's fine. The only time you think everything's in chaos is if you turn on the television and it's like, oh yeah. And you're not the only doctor coming forward. A couple have been on talk radio going, even in the epicenter, Wuhan, the death rate was only 1 out of 20,000. The death toll they're giving us now is I keep saying, medically speaking, it's a great year. From December 29th to March 20th right now, if we've got less than 6,000 dead, that's phenomenal. Because last year from the regular flu, it was already worse than this.
So I heard your interview yesterday, and you had Dr. Kettner, and I really respected what he had to say because he's clearly a straight up medical guy and he believes in viruses and all that, right? But he is just an honest epidemiologist, and he's looking at the data objectively, and he's not got caught up in, you know, trying to be a public relations representative for the CDC like most doctors that are doing interviews. So what he said about the 1 in 20,000 deaths in Hubei province, so I extrapolated that to the human population just to give a comparative number, because I think that's a really, really important thing to look at these mortality numbers and keep things in perspective. So that's a great segue. And when I extrapolated that out, it would only yield 15,000 deaths in the United States. So in the 2017-18 flu season, which was a particularly bad one, there were 80,000 deaths from influenza. So
I've been showing those numbers, Doc. I've been showing those numbers. It's their numbers, but I digress. Go ahead. So
maybe this is a good time to put up that graphic, the one with all the pictures of the different plagues. Do you recall the anti-vaxxer infographic? Infographic. It's the infographic. Okay, here we go. And so if you scroll all the way to the bottom of that, look at those nasty viruses. I know. Well, these pictures look like koosh balls. Well, the bottom of the graphic, so go up a little bit. Up a little bit? Yeah. So we're just going to look at the pretty picture here. So right there. Okay. So if you go down just one more notch, you can see the source of the information right there in pale gray print next to where it says visual capitalist. And you can see that the information is from the CDC and the World Health Organization. So the numbers for COVID-19 is a real problem of how they are tabulating the data in terms of defining cases and deaths. And I can talk about that at length, but it will just accept their numbers for now, because I think most would agree that if anyone has accurate numbers, it's the CDC and the World Health Organization. So this is as of yesterday, or is this today, the 20th? Oh, I'm messing this up. No problem. There you go. No problem. So you can see that the total number of deaths from COVID-19 is 11.4 thousand. So 11,400. That's worldwide. Strange. Worldwide. But that's still strange, because that doesn't jive with the numbers they were just showing a couple of days ago, where it was under 6,000. Yes. Well, they're increasing the numbers on a daily basis. I expected that. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. But even so even if we accept these numbers as accurate, so this is in the entire planet, right? So remember, I said, and I know actually as of February 3rd in the United States, there were already 20,000 deaths from the flu, according to the CDC. So we're worldwide, 3 months into this pandemic, and we're not even meeting the US flu numbers as of a month and a half ago. Wow. Right. So to keep things in comparison. And then if you look a little bit above the COVID-19 on the chart, and right there. So some significant epidemics that people or pandemics that people might know about: the Hong Kong flu, right where your cursor is, and you can see the death toll from that
It's
was
1 million from
1
'68
million.
to 1970. Yep.
Right. And so I think there may be some viewers who actually remember that experience. And so it'd be interesting to find someone to compare what measures were taken at that time and what the general consensus was among the population in terms of fear about that. But there's somewhere on the near the bottom of the graph, there is I think the SARS right there. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, no, on the left side, the swine flu. Sorry, the swine flu, 2009 to 10. Now that's something we all remember, and there was absolutely no panic around that, like there is today. And you can see that there were, what is it, 200,000?
200,000, yes.
200,000 dead from that. So that's in recent memory, and there was no quarantine. There was no restriction of freedom. There was no mobilization of the military. There was no financial collapse that was related to that pandemic. And yet, looking at the raw numbers, it was a much, much bigger death toll than we're talking about currently.
Indeed. And also with the swine flu, I don't know if you had heard this. I'm sure you have, but there was a law that was passed in Massachusetts, and apparently it was languishing in Congress. They couldn't get it through. And
Yes.
then suddenly swine flu popped up and it raced through. And that law is still on the books. It's 11 years old and it applies to right now. They can force vaccinate, force medicate. There's no liability for any healthcare worker or anybody that's approved to force vaccinate or medicate. No liability. They can enter your private property. They can force quarantine. It's everything they need for right now. And it appears they are ever so gently implementing it while people are still waiting to see what happens.
Right. And this is based on a model draft legislation put out by the federal government. And it's all the provisions you mentioned sounds like they pretty much copied the draft legislation. So this comes from a very high up, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, there are political opportunities. There's a similar bill in New York State that I haven't looked. I keep meaning to look what the current state, because it was stuck in committee a couple of months ago when they were ramping up the sort of forced vaccination, since they got rid of the religious exemption in New York based on the measles outbreak last spring that no one died from. But that's another story.
Let me ask you, because it's not very often. And I do need you to clarify as easily in layman as you can about how viruses don't travel the way they're trying to claim. But what did you think when you saw, the mainstream measles, it's going to kill everyone. And YouTube and social media just lit up with that simple Brady Bunch.
Yes.
We all
just thinking of that.
You get measles, you move on. It's just no big deal. But these people, the Boston Globe, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, so forth, so on, blah, blah, blah. They're all pushing after this event is over. Social separation will be the new norm.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the goals.
No, it's definitely one of the goals. But in your medical opinion, somebody having a slight cold or flu, or what they're calling COVID-19, it can't pass the way they're talking about this, correct?
Right. Absolutely. And so I think there's really two big parts to understand this. And one part is that, and I'm going to say that this is going to surprise people, but there's no conclusive evidence for any virus that it causes disease in humans. So I know that that's a hard pill to swallow. And because we've all observed what we think is contagion, that it would be very powerfully explained if there were some infectious agent that we, coughed and sneezed out and someone around us picked up. But the thing is that there's actually no evidence for that either. And I know it sounds confusing because you've observed it, but did you really observe it? Because did you take, the snot from someone's nose and put it in someone else's nose? Or did you just observe that, well, people tend to get sick at the same time? Right. So well, let me ask you, if you have a family of 4 people, when someone got sick, maybe 2 people got sick, maybe 3 people, but was it that everybody got sick every time? Because if it was so easy to transmit, wouldn't everybody get sick if they're in close proximity? So if you think about it carefully like that, you can see that the explanation is not quite perfect. But I want to bring up something that is going to give you some conclusive evidence about this. And then I also want to talk about possible mechanisms of contagion that could explain what we observe. But this comes from, so I heard a Dr. Tom Cowan, who's another physician that has gone outside of the mainstream health system, and he gave a nice talk, and he referenced this excellent book called The Invisible Rainbow. And this book is about the theory that actually these pandemic diseases may actually be caused by some kind of electricity or electromagnetism. Now, I haven't fully investigated that research, but I plan to. But there certainly is correlation in time that a lot of these pandemics were timed to occur right after or in at the same time as major electric infrastructure projects were introduced, such as the initial electric grid and radar and things like that. And of course, there's talk about 5G with this current outbreak, although I don't want to speculate. I don't think that that's necessarily what's going on.
Real quick, right there. A lot of people, I've talked about 5G. We've all talked about 5G because it's bad.
Absolutely.
It's a military weapon. It's bad. I get that. The only problem, some people are inadvertently timed. All these deaths are from the 5G. It's like, right. But there aren't all these deaths. So we're muddying the water
exactly.
for them, and they're moving forward. There aren't all these deaths.
Right.
I just checked the death list 2 days ago, and it was 5,000 and change. So I was just rounding it up to 6,000. I just checked it now, and it's 11,000. And yes, they will start juking the stats. But the thing is nobody knows anybody. Somebody I know died. Well, they're going to start slapping the label on there because it's going to work to their agenda. These people have massive reach. They just shut down the world with words. It's amazing. But
well, I'm gonna definitely get that, because I want to talk also about the testing, and that will help you see how inaccurate these numbers may be. But let me get back to this issue of contagion, because it's really important. So in 1918, right around the time of the Spanish flu, or right after the Spanish flu, rather, the U.S. Preventive Health Service wanted to understand how this pandemic spread, because they want to be able to protect the public. So I'm going to assume that they had beneficent intentions. So this, like I said, this study was, these studies I'm about to describe were conducted by the United States Public Health Service. So this was not some independent scientist. Okay, this is the government-sponsored research. So what they did is they had 100 healthy subjects, and then they had a number of people who were sick with the flu. And so the first experiment they did is they basically took snot out of their nose. They took the material that they coughed up, and they mixed it up in a solution. Okay. And then they put that solution in the 100 healthy volunteers, and they put it in their nose, they put it in their throat, and they even put it in their eyeballs. So all the proposed mechanisms of transmission they wanted to test, and they wanted to get these healthy people sick. So what happened? None of them got sick. Mm-hmm. Not one person. So they did a subsequent experiment to try and push it further. Okay, so they once again collected these materials from the sick people, and this time they injected it into the volunteers. Okay, once again, no one got sick. So I think they conducted even a third experiment where they wanted to simulate more of a natural transmission from person to person. So in this case, they had the sick person and the healthy subject sit in very close proximity for a period of 5 minutes and talk to each other. And then they had them like put their mouths really close, but not, not touching. They didn't want them to be making out or anything. But then they had the healthy person breathe out as hard they could, and the sick person breathe in as hard as they could, and basically breathed out the sick air into the healthy person who sucked it in. So after this final experiment, once again, none of the healthy subjects contracted the influenza. They went on further to do a similar study in horses, where they actually covered the sick, because animals do get some of these illnesses, and many of these flu pandemics, animals were sick, not necessarily the same time. Sometimes animals get sick like a month or two before the people, and there's no known, passing it back between animals and humans, but it's the same illness essentially. And so they put these bags over the horses' heads and had them sneeze and cough into the bags. So they're filled up with snot and, allegedly germs. And then they use those bags and put food in them for the healthy horses to eat. And once again, none of the healthy horses got sick. So you have this series of experiments where they tried as hard as they could basically to pass the flu to healthy people, and they were unable to do it as hard as they tried.
That's insane.
I know. It's astonishing, isn't it?
I listened to a dissertation on a very similar, but I don't think the same test, and it was the same results.
There have been other instances of this. Like, for example, there were some scientists who were basically looked at the research and that disproved germ theory, and so they were a bit bold and they wanted to test this. So they actually had the bacteria that causes the plague isolated in a test tube, and the plague was passed supposedly by the fecal oral route. And I think this is actually quite possible, because there could be toxins in the fecal matter that could make someone sick without any need for microorganisms. But they had the isolated plague bacteria. And so normally people would get it, they would touch something with feces, then touch their hand to their mouth and eat the infectious material. So if they had the pure bacteria that supposedly causes the plague, and they drank it down, and they did not get the plague.
Wow. So I was at a dinner, and lots of family members. A relative was an RN, and she came in and gave everyone the free flu shot. I just stepped out. Everyone got the shot. This is hand to God. Strike me with coronavirus right now if I'm exaggerating at all. My grandmother ended up in hospice because of this flu shot. My aunt and uncle ended up in the hospital for several days. My other aunt and uncle ended up in the hospital for a week, and my father and stepmother got sick. Yeah, they still didn't catch the correlation. They all got the shot and all had outstandingly bad results. I didn't even get sick being around all these sick people with no shot.
Right. Well, the influenza vaccine actually can make you really sick. It's known to cause paralysis, which is known as Guillain-Barré syndrome. But this is well documented. It's on the package insert. You can go to the VAERS database and see, which only represents about 1% of the possible adverse effects, but you still see plenty of cases of people being paralyzed from the flu vaccine. So, and then even the own medical establishment's research has shown that if you get a flu vaccine for 3 consecutive years, your chance of contracting the flu increases.
Wow. Hey, real quick, let me just segue. I forgot. I'm not going to segue. I'm just going to interrupt you real quick. I do that. Sorry, Doc. I have a terrible memory. But check this out.
Not as bad as Alex Jones.
Well, that's funny you bring that up. It's funny you bring that up, because I had contacted Dr. Kauffman and I said, hey, I saw you on Crow. I really think it's important. I'll put you up on both channels at the same time. And he said, he got back to me because you've been inundated, I'm sure, with invitations left and right. And he told me via email, and you guys know how I am. let's catch up. But I'm going on the Alex Jones show first, and I went, okay. I said some I actually basically put some facts out about Alex Jones and said, thank you anyways. I'm all set. The doctor walked away from Alex Jones to come on the show, and that's a fact. I still have the email. So here's somebody that's not trying to become Alex Jones famous. He has integrity, and that's a fact. So that's phenomenal, man. That blew me away when you actually did text me up, and I'm like, wow, this truly is a smart man. Because if you've watched any of my shows, I don't know how much time you've had. When I have someone that knows what they're talking about, I don't say words. I stay in the background. I interrupt once in a while, but I stay out of it. Let them talk. That's what this whole thing is for.
Right.
So,
well, it was definitely clear to me after seeing some of your material that you would give me the chance to get my points across, and also that I'd be able to speak about things at a more complex level than I would be, and also I knew I wouldn't have to watch what I say about other topics. Because I wouldn't get grilled on that. But really, it came down to just, I've never really watched Alex Jones' show. When I was first waking up, of course, I was exposed to his material because I think, he's a kind of an entry level, news person in a way that a lot of people can maybe get inspired and move on. But I really couldn't stand listening to his loud voice and his style. And last night when I was thinking about this and trying to prepare, I just had this really anxious, nervous, bad feeling in my gut that it just wasn't right and I shouldn't do it. And fortunately, I had the ability to listen to that. And I'm so glad I did, because I'm already really enjoying this experience.
Sweet. I'm glad. Honestly, you made perfect sense. Like, isn't it important to get it out to the largest audience possible? With the amount of people in the chat right now that are going to share this video on their channels and their channels, this will get out just as well. And you don't have to worry about it being used against you or edited or whatever, because Alex Jones has been placed here since the beginning. He has Central Intelligence ties. It's just words out of his own mouth. And what he does is he points people in the wrong direction. Slightly askew, but enough so that when something like this happens, the people that were allegedly awoken are sitting back and listening to the mainstream.
Right.
He pushed Trump on everybody, which Donald Trump's a billionaire actor, really bad hair having dude who doesn't really care. You don't become a billionaire twice in America without destroying tens of thousands of people's lives. You just don't. It's how it works. That's why I'm not a billionaire. So
absolutely.
At any rate. Okay. So I've got five links that you sent. Is there anything specific you'd like to jump into? I've got COVID, history, recent advances, new scientist, and anti-vaxxer. And speaking of that, right before this whole thing happened, I don't know if you paid attention. You'd had to have seen it, being an MD. The anti-vaxxer, they were just going after anybody that your daughter got a shot, and then that day she changed forever. You're a conspiracy theorist. They were putting people's families whose lives were destroyed from bad shots out there. I had never seen such an anti-vaxxer push from the mainstream in my entire life. And then this is going to come with mandatory. There's no two ways about it.
Yes, I agree with you. And I'm very concerned about that. And I'm working on a legal strategy to combat that, based on Cal Washington's approach from the In Power movement. And he's a brilliant legal mind. He was actually on Crow 777 also. And you can find some videos from the In Power group on Vimeo. They've been very successful using this approach for smart meters. And they plan to expand it to vaccines and 5G and basically any issue where a government policy infringes on our rights or requires compelled performance. That would be something that we don't want to agree to. We can use this strategy where we hold the people in government personally liable based on their constitutional oath. And so I'm investigating this, and definitely we'll talk more about it in the future. I hope
you have the opportunity to do that, because I I don't know what you call him, co-host that joins me from Louisiana a couple of times a week. He knows the letter of the law like you read about. This is his thing, and he knows strategies like that. I just hope anybody gets a chance to implement it. But
absolutely,
more power to you. So if the creek don't rise and the good Lord's willing, and I can get you back and have Brandon on at the same time, you guys can talk about that, because this kid is it's amazing how much he knows about the law for someone that doesn't do it for a living. But the floor is yours, man.
Yeah, well, that's definitely an area that I am studying vigorously. So if you would pull up the article that as 3 ways viruses have.
Okay.
And because I want to talk about viruses and what they really are and what real viruses are. And so this is an article from the University of California, San Francisco.
Do you happen to know the name of it? Because I don't see 3 ways here. History and recent advances, coronavirus, the history of pandemics, anti-vaxxer, COVID-19.
It's the title is 3-way viruses. Did I not send this one?
Well, start, and I'll find it. 3-way viruses. Give me 1 second.
Okay, and it's on ucsf.edu.
UC.
SF.
Yep, you got a
.edu.
Edu. Okay.
And yeah, it's 3 ways viruses have changed science for the better. You found it? Great.
Stand by, coming up right now. Here you go. Have at it.
All right. So if you scroll down a little bit to the picture, okay, so you could stop right there. So I want to talk about real viruses that exist that have been characterized. So after germ theory came out, the scientists that were involved in that, there was one very important one named Robert Koch. And he's a German scientist. There's the Robert Koch Institute named after him that still exists in Germany, where they do study of biology. And he laid out the steps of how you can prove that a certain germ causes a certain disease. And the first step was that you can isolate the microbe from a sick person. And this is perhaps the most important step, because if you can't do this, you really can't prove that something causes a disease because you didn't find it in the sick person. So what you're seeing here, this image is the big semicircle in the bottom is actually the end of a bacterial cell. And those little balloon-like structures hanging off of it are what's called bacteriophages or phages. And they're essentially viruses that infect bacteria. Now, they don't necessarily destroy the bacteria. You can see them destroying some bacterial cells, but actually it's thought that overall for the population, they actually support the population. And there's some evidence that they may actually be a stasis form of the bacteria itself, and that they have been observed to differentiate into other bacteria. Okay, so a little bit different than what we're told about the viruses, that they're like parasites, that they go into a host cell and then they reproduce and then they explode it and destroy it. That's what they tell us in medical school and in college that viruses do. But this is not really what has been found in the research for bacteriophages. And so what they've been able to do is have a mixture of bacteria where they observe the phages and they spin that down in a centrifuge, and there's a small layer in there that has the purified phage particles. And then if you scroll down, perfect, right there, that picture, those are what the individual phage particles look like. So they're the same thing as those little balloons in the first picture, but they're blown up because they've been isolated and now imaged under the microscope separately in a pure form. And so you can see that they have a very specific geometric structure. These are 4 different phage varieties, right? That's why they all look a little different. And that they have a characteristic structure where they have a head and then they have a tail, right? And then they may have other appendages there. So in lower organisms like bacteria, amoeba, and sea algae, you can, several different scientists have isolated these viruses from those organisms and in a pure form, and then we're able to image them just like this. Okay, so so you can see this, you can see it's a real thing. You look at it, you can tell that it's a picture of a real thing. It's not an artist rendering. It's not created in a studio, right? And it's something by itself. It's the only thing on the slide. It's not contaminated, so you know that it's a distinct entity. Okay. Gotcha. So let's switch over now to tell you which one in a second.
Take your time. Take your time. We're in no rush.
So I think we could look at the one that's New Scientist.
Got it.
Coronavirus New Scientist.
Yep. Stand by. Google took away our live streaming, so we have to use this new platform, and it's just a tad slower, but here you go.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so that's the picture that I want to show you. So this is the supposed picture of coronavirus, and you could see that it does look like it's a picture from a real microscope, but those are not the normal colors, so it's been colorized to make a prettier picture, right? And you know, scientists do not do that in their papers. So this is something, you know, that's supposed to appeal and get more readership, and that's the purpose of it. So you could just kind of ignore the colors. So if you look at this cell, and I'm not sure exactly what kind of cells, but the caption just says that this is coronavirus. But these are most likely are some kind of human cell or some other mammalian type of cell. And then supposedly these little dots on the outside are the virus. Okay, so, and that looks a little bit like the picture that we saw with the bacteriophages, right? But here's what's missing. Where is the picture of the isolated virus particle? Because cells can have all kinds of things on their surface. They can have different receptors, right? They could be extruding proteins and cell fragments, and it could represent that. So there are a lot of things. There's not anything that would be specifically tell you that this is a distinct entity from the cell, or if it is, it doesn't tell you what it is, right? So because there's no pure form. Now, according to several articles in the media, there's a scientist in China that actually supposedly isolated the coronavirus 19. And now this is not published, okay? There's no scientific publication because supposedly this happened too recent for there to be a publication. Now, they're accelerating everything else, so it's a little bit hard to buy, but it's not published in a scientific journal. There are several news stories about it, and none of them have the picture. Okay, there's no picture of the isolated virus. So they say they isolated it, but they didn't describe the chemical characterization of the virus, like it has a protein shell and then a double RNA strand or whatever. They only really describe the genetic material. So let's now switch to one other picture of the coronavirus, one that is spread around much more. Like, every time you look up anything on YouTube or Facebook, or there's a post related to this pandemic, there's a little thing from the CDC, right? So this is the COVID-19 summary.png with the CDC logo.
Oh, that's fancy.
Yeah, so this is the picture that you see in all those little warnings from the CDC, and it's from their website. And you can see that this is completely made up.
Absolutely.
Right?
I could have done better than that, Doc, literally.
But it looks scary, doesn't it? I mean, look, the virus is represented in red. Red is the control color.
You bet. Right?
So this was carefully done for the purpose, because every time I see this on the screen, even, I get a little jolt. And I know it's not what it is, but I still am affected by it.
Let me just jump in and give you some props real quick.
Please.
Did you guys just notice that the doc said, and red is the control color? That doesn't happen very often. If the doctors do know it, they ain't saying it. Dr. Kauffman just did, so that's badass.
I didn't learn that as a doctor.
You're dead nuts on it, man.
That's
you're
from
on
my
it.
Mark Passio days.
Nice.
So the big question I have is, why are they putting up a fake picture? Why don't they just put the real picture? We all would like to see it, right? If it's a real thing. I mean, even after 9/11, they didn't put up an artist rendering. They put photographs, right? I mean, in this digital,
this is affecting everybody on the whole world on a
Absolutely.
personal level, period. So
Absolutely. I mean, what we all are walking around with a camera in our pockets that we have thousands of images at every time. I mean, we live in a world where everything is photographed, right? I mean, I've even heard Crow say something like his rule, right? That if it hasn't been photographed or videotaped, it doesn't exist.
and he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
I think it's a very clever test. So why are we seeing this fake picture? Where is the real picture? So, I mean, the answer is there is no real picture, but you really need to question this. So, so there's no picture of any virus because none of these viruses that supposedly cause disease in humans have ever been isolated, not one. So there's this really interesting German virologist named Stefan Lanka, Lanka.
I'm familiar, actually.
Yes.
That's cool. Go ahead.
And one of the other articles I sent you is about him. So he is actually studies viruses, right? That's what he's trained. He's a researcher, a scientist. And earlier in his career, he actually isolated and characterized a virus from sea algae. And he also learned that virus also plays a symbiotic support role with the sea algae, so it doesn't kill it or destroy it. So after he learned about viruses through his own work, he wanted to branch out into viruses that cause disease. And so he started reviewing the research on some viruses. And he couldn't find the same paper like he had done where he had isolated and characterized the virus for any of these viruses. And so he got really curious and he scoured the research and he read their methods and kind of debunked what they did. They basically cheated and said something was the virus, but they never isolated it and proved it. So he issued this challenge because he wanted this to, be known in the public. And he probably felt that this was a way to get some publicity. And so he said, if anyone out there can prove that measles is a virus that causes disease, basically, that he'll pay them 100,000 euros. And so, several people rose to this challenge, but there was one particular person that presented, I think, 7 papers that were sort of the papers that had been accepted maybe as showing evidence of measles, but they didn't actually isolate the virus. And so, but there was some confusion. And, this is some challenging stuff to think about, right? You have to spend some time studying the background material and knowing how scientific experiments and how to reason and what you can conclude from data. So it'd be very difficult for a court system, to do this successfully. So what happened is that this person thought he proved it. Dr. Lanka said, you didn't prove it. And so he sued him in court. So at the lowest court level, the other guy won. The court said, oh yeah, this is proof enough, pay the 100,000 euros. But Lanka knew better. He appealed it. It went to the German Supreme Court. Okay. And at the Supreme Court level, the court actually consulted several scientists to get their opinion on this because they realized that they weren't really qualified to make a ruling on this issue. And so ironic, they actually got at least one scientist from the Robert Koch Institute, which was based on the germ theory, which this was basically arguing against. So it put these scientists in an awkward position that they had to, consider coming to a conclusion that would go against their sort of namesake at their work. But these scientists and the court concluded that there was no proof of measles, and he did not have to pay the $100,000.
Wow. All right. I'm going to address this real quick because this comment keeps popping up over and over and over. Everyone's saying, ask the doctor if nitrous oxide can cure COVID. But let me just reiterate. We just showed you the numbers. This COVID is, I'm pretty sure, completely made up out of whole cloth because this is the worst pandemic in the world because it's not actually killing anybody. And they're not showing you the numbers that with all the people getting infected, they're not showing you the people, 50% of them are being cured because it's a simple cold. The people dying allegedly are in 70s, 80s, elderly. and they're going to start tagging everybody. But look around you, talk to people, be for real. I have over 500,000 people on here that love or hate me, and nobody sent me an email saying, Ritchie, you're completely wrong. I know people that they're sending me emails about everything else on the planet, on the earth, and not that. And I'm not seeing them anywhere. And as long as you're out and about, there is no coronavirus. You turn on the television and you're going to die. So, but I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, well,
nitrous oxide killing the virus.
So, I mean, what I'm really saying is that there is no virus.
That's what I'm agreeing with you on.
If you step back and look at this objectively from a certain point of view, like think about the point of view, if you, let's say that you had a lot of resources at your disposal and you wanted to create a pandemic that would create fear in everyone, right? But it's really hard to create a biological weapon. I'm not even sure that they exist, to be honest with you.
That's been stuck in my head for 2 days. I'm so glad you just brought it up because I was supposed to bring it up because I'm like, believe it or not, I know a lot of dudes that have been to war at every generation, the bullets, the flamethrowers, the bombs, etc. But I never, ever, ever heard one story. Every male in my family's been in every war in the 19th century or the 20th, 1900s and on. I never heard any stories about that. I think you might be right. I was just thinking that.
So, but even if you think biological weapons, could be made, certainly you would agree that it would be difficult and expensive, right? So let's say we didn't have the money to do that, but we still wanted to create a pandemic. So a really convenient way to do this would be, well, one thing is let's just do it during cold and flu season because we know there'll be lots of people sick, right? So what if we just create a test that is very non-specific, and it would basically test positive in many people who are sick with almost any illness. And when people have their normal seasonal illness, cold, flu, pneumonia, whatever you want to call it, I don't know that those things are really distinct from each other. To be honest, it could just be that one's more severe than the other and they're the same exact thing. But you just take those people, you give them this test, it's going to come back positive. And then you call that some scary name and you say that there's a pandemic and then you can put out all this projected numbers about how it's going to spread and kill so many people, but that you don't have to base any of that on actual facts or data. So it'd be really convenient. You could totally create a thing. Like, let's say this year, there's going to be, 55,000 cases of deaths from the flu, right? And that's pretty much what happened last year. Well, let's say we're gonna say there's only 40,000 deaths from the flu, and the 15,000 of it we're gonna say is from coronavirus, or whatever name we want to make up, right? It would be really, really convenient and easy to do this, and all of the data, if you trust it, it's still consistent with this explanation.
It's amazing how this was all put in motion by words. Americans have really, really let me down, how they just ran and sheltered in place. And they're doing it perfectly. These people must be sitting back going, we weren't even juking the stats. We weren't even saying millions are infected, hundreds of thousands. 4,500 people are dying. We're in a state of emergency, even though Massachusetts was one of the first states to go state of emergency. We didn't yet have a CDC confirmed case of COVID-19.
Absolutely.
And then we went national, and I was like, I'm hitting the road. And then I heard you on Crow. So big props to Crow 777. He's got your entire interview on crow777.com, I believe. He also ran some of it free on his YouTube channel, but most of you guys know Crow. Everyone's going to know Dr. Kauffman. And Dr. Kauffman, everyone's going to know you. They're not going to dig you doing this, brother. Just FYI, man. All my subscribers will be praying for you, for real. But just so you know.
Let me speak to that a little bit, because I'll tell you that I hesitated for almost a year before speaking publicly about these issues and about real medicine and real truth and health. And so I had to carefully consider things. And I know that there are many other health practitioners, several of them MDs like Nicholas Gonzalez and Andrew Molden, who suddenly and unexpectedly died at quite a young age. And some of them, allegedly by suicide, like Anne Baroque, although her family said that she was thriving and doing great, no indication of her being depressed. And so I want to let your viewers know out there that I am very happy in my life, and I love my children, and I would never consider taking a turn to harm myself, and that I'm not reckless, and I'm in good health. I have no illness. And so if something should suddenly happen to me, please don't accept it as the truth. And
if something were to happen to you just based on this hour that's just passed, I will never let it go. I don't do that. Ask David Crowley's family. I still talk about that to this day. So,
well, I'm going to keep going as long as I have people out there who are willing to listen, because there's so much more important information that people need to know about how to take care of their health. And, I mean, in speaking about that, we're talking about these mortality numbers. So I want to point out another relative couple of numbers. And these come from mainstream studies. Okay, this is from Johns Hopkins, that in the United States, they estimate that 250,000 people a year die from medical errors.
Wow.
Yes. And then there's an additional study that was reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association that each year 128,000 people die from prescription drugs, not misused, not overdose, but taken as directed. And I believe that number is actually underestimate, because I don't think it includes some things. But nonetheless, if you add those two numbers together, because we're talking about deaths directly attributable to healthcare, okay, then our number is 378,000. Now, that is the third leading cause of death in our country, according to the CDC. Now, the CDC doesn't list that, okay, but those numbers are real. And if you put them on the CDC's top 10 causes of death, it fits at number 3.
I'm kind of embarrassed that I've never even seen that number or looked it up over the years. I don't know. I got a lot on my plate, but I mean, that's insanity.
Well, there are other researchers who have tried to make estimations to get that number to be more accurate, and they have come up with calculations of about 750,000 deaths a year from medical care. And that would be the number one cause of death, according to CDC's data. So I can't confirm, that that's the real number, but the real number is definitely considerably higher than 378,000. But 378,000, that's the medical establishment's own number. So I like to go with that, and it's plenty bad. So why aren't people running away from the healthcare system when there's so many more deaths from that? And these studies, they're published in main newspapers. That it's not advertised, it's not plastered everywhere, but it's not hidden. It's easy to find.
Yeah, but that's also like, we're Americans. Every single one of these things tells you straight up, don't keep it near you, don't put it to your head. But it's on all those words on that piece of paper. There's so many words. I just agree, and let me use my phone now. They've got us to the point. I mean, when the articles and the testing and all that stuff came out that said people have now surpassed goldfish in having the attention span of less than a goldfish, that was all by design. That was just years and years of soap operas and shows where it goes for 30 seconds, it goes to another scene. And now with all the social media, people don't seem to care, right? Man.
And it's also fluoride.
Oh, this doctor is the best. Fluoride. All right. I didn't know. I wasn't gonna put you out there at all.
Listen, I mean, I don't really see it as a risk, because I think it was 2001, the CDC actually put out a press release instructing parents of newborns not to use fluoridated water to mix formula because it's a neurologic toxin.
I was telling people about fluoride because I worked in a water treatment facility plant. I did the plumbing in there years and years ago, and it was a multi-million-dollar big deal. And there's a tank that mixes right in with the supply, and it's clearly labeled. It was never hidden. And I looked it up, and I'm like, this is rat poison.
Yes.
And then Prozac popped up, and I'm like, this is rat poison. How can you dose this? This is an old analogy, but it's all I got right now. It's like drinking sunburn lotion and expecting it to work on your skin. I said that terribly. I apologize, Doc. It's been a long day. But I mean, how could you dose somebody that weighs 240 pounds and a newborn infant with fluoride that's in the water? And the effects are pretty clear, especially we're seeing it right now. Everyone's seeing it, except
there's so many, things that should just be obvious. Like, for example, if it really helps your teeth, why would you need to swallow it?
Right. That's what I was trying to say. I just said it really poorly. So
yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. People talk about antidepressants that way too. I heard an analogy of like, if you instead of opening up the cap to put the engine oil, just pour the oil on top of the whole engine and hope it gets in the right
I might
place.
start doing that from now on. See how good the cruiser runs. You know what I'm saying? Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I've been hanging out in this location for an extra 2 days just so I could make sure I could use this particular facility with its Wi-Fi so I could do this live stream. And I'm so stoked that you made time. You can go for 5 more hours, or you can wrap it up right now. But long story short, for the goldfish in the audience, including myself, the social separation, keeping people apart, because this killer virus that, according to their numbers, isn't killing anybody really in the scheme of things. And it's not a virus because viruses don't work like that. Am I wrong or am I right?
No, you're absolutely right.
Wow. You said something about looking under the microscope, the dark microscope. What was it?
Dark field microscopy.
So when you saw the videos and pictures on the dark field what you just said, you said you could actually see specks of light in the cells.
Absolutely.
And that would tie to frequencies and everything else like you've been talking about.
So this is there are several scientists that help develop the knowledge about this. And I'm not even sure what to call the science except microbiology. But yes, you can take a blood sample from either of us and put those living blood cells under a dark field microscope. And of course, it's not nearly as high resolution as the Rife microscope, but still you can visualize this. And now the specks of light has to do with the optical properties of the microscope. So it's not like they're radiating light. Although that does occur, they're called biophotons. That's sort of a separate topic. But yeah, they appear as little dots of light. And if the blood sample is from someone who is not healthy, then you'll actually see them budding out of the cell, and you'll see more mature forms of them as they're differentiating into, and they basically become the species of bacteria or fungi that we would recognize, like that any microbiologist would be able to do a gram stain on and say, this is Staphylococcus or this is Klebsiella, whatever, organism, but they all come from that source. And this has been well documented. So I've seen these protids go through this sort of cycle. And it's great to watch. And then you see them in a real sample, you see them just in different forms simultaneously. But if you see the more mature forms, you know that there's a disease state because that's what they're responding to. And so it can be very diagnostic. And there are many physicians that not classically trained physicians, but physicians maybe trained in German new medicine or other in terrain medicine that would normally do this as a diagnostic procedure.
Where can people find you? I know people have been looking for you, and I know how to find you, but where would you like people to find you? Because I'll post them below this so everyone that watches it.
Please. Well, I have a sort of fledgling YouTube channel of my own with a few episodes. I'm trying to put out some material every week, and my next show is going to be on detoxification. That's been requested by a lot of people, and it's a very good topic. So I will do that in some detail, maybe on Monday. But the name of the channel the show is called Medicamentum Authentica.
Oh, you're killing me. How do I spell all that?
Yeah, well, it's the Latin for authentic medicine.
I got you. You know what? Send me the link and I'll post it in the description below this video on both channels so you can find him.
I
What else?
definitely will. And then people can actually reach out to me by email with questions, topic suggestions, or if they're interested in consultation. And that is Dr. Andy Kauffman at protonmail.com, DrandyKaufman at protonmail.
And that will be pinned in the comments for the goldfish. I can't help but notice it's Andy Kaufman.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
would you believe they put a man on the moon and then here you are? I mean, come on, man. That's
Well, sometimes I feel like I'm on the moon when I'm
Yeah.
around people, talking about the mainstream paradigm. So maybe it's apropos. I'm certainly not as funny as that man was, though.
Yeah, you're pretty good. You're pretty good. So he was strange. I always thought he was strange. I grew up around that. What else?
So, I mean, certainly I can get into a little bit more information if you think it's important. We definitely have covered a lot, and I think I've given introductory material that people can understand basics of what I'm saying enough that they can investigate some of this.
How about this?
So,
How about this? I don't want you to think what about this one right here? Did we hit on that at all?
Is that one I sent to you?
It is.
Yeah. Because if you scroll down, there are more of those pictures, but no pictures of the isolated virus.
And this is from 1967, coronavirus OC16.
Yeah, so this paper describes the initial discovery of coronaviruses. When I was in medical school, they taught us that the common cold is generally caused by a coronavirus or a rhinovirus and a few others.
Right.
So I was very familiar.
I was trying to explain to people that the coronavirus is the prefix to pretty much any disease. I mean, any cold and flu disease like this. So coronavirus, the word itself has been around for a long time, like this picture shows, correct? Or am I wrong?
Yes, absolutely. And they observed something on some of these microscopes that look like a halo, and they called it a crown. It's the imagination of a scientist. But those pictures were not of the purified virus. They were of some kind of particles mixed with cells, with human cells or animal cells. The typical kind of thing you see in these papers.
Unbelievable. You said if you've got anything else that you think we should be sharing right now, have at it, brother.
I think it's important to talk a little bit about the test. Because some people may be required or encouraged or think it's a good idea to get tested. And so I want to kind of give a little bit of a warning that if you do get tested, if you're positive, then they are going to have the ability to control what goes on with you completely, including probably incarcerate you in some way.
Without a doubt. It's only a swab though, right? Because every medical pro I've talked to said it's a swab. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a swab, and they can swab a bunch of different places on your body. There, the initial protocol was to swab, every opening on your body virtually. I don't think they could practically do that. But here's the thing: what they're testing for is a genetic sequence. Okay, so I think now that they don't really describe in detail exactly how they developed the test, right? So I can't know for sure. But if you look at how Bob Gallo developed the HIV test, it will give you an idea of how this kind of test might be developed. So what he did was he took some cells that were the type of cells that were supposedly affected in AIDS, and he mixed them with a bunch of toxic chemicals, basically oxidizing agents. So it put oxidative stress. This is why people take antioxidants, right? Because they want to combat that process, the sort of chain reaction of free radicals. And so in this case, he purposely added it to the cells to put stress on them. Then he added hydrocortisone, which affects transcription of DNA in the cells, and basically made the cells really sick to the point that they started extruding bits of material to try and purge the toxicity out of the cells. Okay, so this exposed proteins and DNA that came out of these cells. And then they simply found an antibody that bound these extruded proteins and said that antibody was specific for HIV. except HIV had not been isolated or identified. It never has been, and it certainly wasn't at that time. So they were essentially measuring cellular destruction. And so many disease processes that cause this type of cellular destruction would show up as a positive HIV test. And subsequently, there's been over 50 different conditions, including pregnancy, that gives a false positive HIV test.
Wow.
So the test for COVID-19 is developed in a very, very similar way. It's against some small piece of DNA that's said to be specific for the coronavirus. But this, I once again go back to HIV, because I think many of your viewers will know that HIV is characterized as a retrovirus, which kind of means it goes backwards. And what that means is that the virus doesn't have normally, the way that we make proteins is we have DNA, which encodes the sequence. The DNA makes RNA, and then the RNA binds the ribosomes that carry the amino acids that build the protein. So it's the RNA really that makes the protein. Now, a retrovirus supposedly only has RNA, no DNA. So in order to make proteins, it uses the host cell's material, but it has the special enzyme reverse transcriptase, which can make DNA from RNA. Normally, it's DNA to RNA to protein, so this is kind of backwards. That's why they call it a retrovirus. So reverse transcriptase, like backwards transcriptase, makes DNA from RNA. So at the time, it was stated that this is a unique protein to retroviruses. And I believe they even had a genetic test based on the sequence that codes reverse transcriptase. Okay, and this was, I think, the initial HIV PCR test. I may be wrong about that, and someone please correct me, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case.
You might have to drop that down a couple of levels.
Okay.
Let me see if I can translate what I think I just heard.
Please.
They made up a test that will work for whatever way they want to go. It's like basically a lie detector.
Well, absolutely. So they found out later on, it became widely known that that special enzyme that they were testing for is actually present in all human cells, and it's used to repair DNA, like when it gets damaged or mutated. So they're actually testing for our own protein. So if we're in a disease,
is going to be positive. I am totally shocked.
So if we're having to repair our DNA from some damage from some illness process, we will express that protein and will test positive for the gene for that protein.
Wow.
And so I think it's probably almost the exact same thing with this test. So I'll give a simple analogy that your viewers can understand about this. So Rich, let's say that we wanted to make a test that would identify you out of a crowd. Okay, like let's say at a crowded mall. Obviously, we can't do that now, although we should be able to. So, but we're not going to measure you directly. Instead, we're going to find a marker for you. Okay, so that could be like a genetic sequence. It's not the actual virus. It's a marker of the virus, right? A shadow. So we're going to use as a marker for you a baseball cap, right? So since you're from Boston, we'll give you a Red Sox cap. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell you, put the cap on and walk around the mall, and we're going to find you because we're going to locate your cap, right? So then we go around the mall and we look for a Boston Red Sox cap. So let's say that you get tired of wearing a cap, it's messing up your hair, and you give it to your buddy. Well, when we find that cap, we're not going to find you, we're going to find your buddy. Let's say that there's another Red Sox fan at the mall, and we find their cap. Then we're going to find them. We're not going to find you. So if anyone else is wearing a cap, or you give that cap to anyone else, the test is going to be false positive. And this is what we're doing with the COVID-19 test. If you happen to have that cap in your blood, and it'd be much more likely to occur if you're sick in any way from, almost any type of illness, that cap will be there and the test will be positive. But it'll be completely.
I knew that was going to be the answer, and I'm at any rate. Go ahead. My bad.
So it's not just this test that's like that, but in fact, every antibody test, so like the test for Lyme disease, for example, is exactly like this. It's not testing the presence of the Lyme bacteria, only the cap that it may or may not be wearing.
Do you have, this is just out of right field real quick, but several dozen people have asked, 23andMe, you know, they're developing this big database and stuff. I mean, there's no doubts about they love tricking people into paying for things that work against them. And I think this is just another one of them. You have any thoughts on it? I mean, if you don't, it's no biggie, your call.
No, I agree. I think they are developing a genomic database of everyone. And, I mean, gosh, what was that movie with Ethan Hawke, that futuristic movie where he had to use someone else's blood? Yeah, Gattaca.
How did I know that? That's awesome. I love when I get an answer right once in a while, especially when I'm talking to a doctor. It makes me look shorter, taller, whatever. I'm tired. It's been a long 5 weeks. I went home to Boston for 8 hours and turned around because as soon as I got there, they went national emergency. I'm like, I'm out of here. They're going to drop a net on Massachusetts.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're much safer outside of a big city.
Yeah, well, it's not even that. I just didn't know how far they were going to go with it right away. Like state of emergency. Well, there's nothing wrong yet. Doesn't matter. Never too early for a state of emergency. Yeah, I got to go. So I'm glad that I did. What else you got here?
Well, I mean, to piggyback on the inaccuracy of the test, all of these numbers that they're collecting, I mean the real numbers, not the projections of the future, because, who knows what that's based on, right? But it's definitely whatever prediction is out there, it's very, very scary. So just the actual numbers. So if you say there's a death from this pandemic, how do you really know? There's not been a systematic protocol for recording this. And of course, this is happening in different countries and in different parts of different countries with different personnel, right? So, but there's no one doing a forensic analysis. If let's say that you get an illness and maybe you test positive for the coronavirus, right? But you could still die of something else. You could have the coronavirus and have a stroke and die. So does that get recorded as a stroke causing death, or does that get recorded as coronavirus causing death?
I'm going to get coronavirus.
Well, I think most likely.
Because the pressure that's been put on the entire medical industry, it's already coming out where doctors can find a platform to say so. They don't seem to see the forest for the trees yet like you do, but I was told by a woman I know, I talked to you from Boston, Mass General, and she said the numbers are going to change over. This is about 5 days ago, to the people that have been CDC, like you have the coronavirus, we just proved it, to you probably do, but we're putting you on the stat list. So the stats are going to start going up. And as I can see, they are.
Yeah. I mean, how there's a million ways that you could sort of fudge the numbers or just have a lot of error. Like it doesn't have to be intentional. You just put people out there to collect the data and don't give them specific enough instructions. I mean, when I've actually conducted social science and medical research before, I realized there's a lot of complexity. You got to think through every little detail if you want your results to be accurate. And if you just kind of go out there haphazardly and start collecting information, it's going to be fraught with error, and it just leads you further astray. In this case, it works though, because even if it's unintentional, it serves the greater purpose of inciting more fear and exaggerating the risks.
I agree. I totally agree. All right. We covered pretty much everything. You got anything else? You've got time. I'm in no rush.
Well,
it's your call, man.
I think I've got a lot of good stuff out tonight, and sometimes you've said enough, but I would certainly be willing to come back and talk more as things develop, if that would be acceptable to you.
If we can, without a doubt, I'd like to line you up with my, I guess, co-host or whatever, Brandon, and you could talk about that legal remedy that you're thinking of, because he's actually gone the same route. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition, but we got to leave everything on the table right now, because they're pointing all their guns at us right now. They're not messing around. They shut down the world with words and didn't even juke the stats.
Right. Well, I'll tell you that,
mind-boggling.
I'm not worried about getting sick, but I am worried about the consequences of this martial law, then the financial collapse.
That's what I'm talking about. That's all I've been talking about.
So what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to maintain my energy, but not panic. and I'm trying to think of what I can do to prepare to protect myself and my family from any possible adverse outcomes. And I would encourage everyone to do the same thing in a calm, rational way. How can you protect yourself from financial loss? Like, there's likely to be bad inflation, and the stock market is obviously going down. So can you get out of that? Can you put your assets into something with true value, like precious metals? How do you protect your business and your income? How do you protect your domicile? From both financial, and then, if it gets to a stage of desperation, could there be looting and things like that? So I'm just trying to think it all out without getting, overly paranoid about anything, but just, be cautiously prepared. I'm definitely enjoying the extra time with my children since they're not in school.
That's nice. Believe it or not, I'm not a dad, but I'm so happy to hear that. That's awesome. That's awesome.
And, so I'm trying to make the best of it. I actually have several brave friends from out of state who came to celebrate the equinox with me this weekend, and they were brave enough not to stay at home. They drove across state lines and came here, and we're having a nice St. Patrick's Day dinner tonight. So you have to keep some normalcy. And, we're all tempted to also, veg out and just, hang out and watch YouTube and Netflix and eat junk food. And, some of that, of course, is totally fine. But, make sure, to still spend your time doing some productive activities, get outside, get fresh air, live normal life, shake people's hands, give people hugs.
And eat a lot of fruit, because like you were just saying, everyone's chilling, making the best of it. This will fix itself. So Trump will come on television and everything will be fixed. He'll send us all $1,000 and everything's going to be great. Well, in the interim, don't sit around smoking weed or doing any other crazy stuff and just eating processed food. I've been eating a lot of fruit on the road, and I've spent every minute I possibly can outside, which makes texting me very difficult, especially.
No, I totally agree. Like, get as much fresh produce as you can. We don't know how long it's going to be readily available, and that's where you get the good nutrition from. Save the canned and frozen foods for later if we.
Yep, I agree. Doc, it has been phenomenal. Totally phenomenal. I really appreciate it. You're going to now be hit up by a bunch of subscribers, and you're going to be amazed at who else follows this channel. It's all people in the same orbit as yourself, we'll call it. How's that?
Well, it's so awesome.
There's going to be a lot of people offering to help you out, so that's not a problem.
Well, it's really rewarding, and I so much appreciate to become part of this community and connect with people, and be able to contribute my part. So thank you to everyone.
You've done that and more. How's that? So, all right, guys, it is Ritchie from Boston and Dr. Andrew Kauffman. All the links will be pinned in the description. Anybody with a YouTube channel, anybody with any social platform, take this video completely. You have my permission and the doc's, and run with it. Get this information out there, or don't. We are out.